Eric, if podcasts were comic books, this episode would be a real collector's item that you should seal in plastic with a backing board. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not want to miss this episode of the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Thank you for joining us on the 88th episode of the Paperback Warrior Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm here today with my podcast co-host Tom. Paperback Warrior began as a blog where Tom and I post daily reviews of the vintage paperbacks we enjoy from the 20th century in the men's adventure, hard-boiled crime, spy, war, western, and other genres. Lately, we've been dabbling in classic horror and science fiction as well. The blog is still going strong at paperbackwarrior.com, and in July of 2019, we expanded our media empire to include this very podcast show with a sizable free archive with over 55 hours of vintage paperback discussion. Let me bring on Tom to tell us what we have this week on the show.
All right, our feature today is called The Secret Life of Frank E. Smith. Now, way back in episode 3 of the show, in July 2019, we did a feature on a crime novelist named Jonathan Craig. His real name was Frank E. Smith. And it turned out that he did a lot more writing than we were aware of at the time. So we're going to explore that aspect of his career today. I also have a funny story to tell you, plus some new acquisitions. And I'll be reviewing Nolan #1, Bait Money by Max Allan Collins. I have no idea, Eric. What are you reviewing today?
Today I'm going to be reviewing Panic by an author named Bill Pronzini, which we don't talk about enough here.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, he's fantastic. I'm excited to hear what you say about that one. Plus, sandwich and all that great content. We need to have a heart-to-heart with each other and the listeners about the future of the podcast. So what should we do first, Eric?
Geez, I don't know, man. You said you had a funny story, so let's just start there.
Okay, I don't want to oversell it, but I thought it was amusing. So to set the stage, my kid sister is named Katie, and she's 5 years younger than me. She's also one of my favorite people in the world. We're very close, and for reasons that stretch back over a decade, we share a Kindle account. Now, that may or may not be kosher with the good people at Amazon, but we're family, and we've lived in the same household, etc., so whatever. I organize my vast Kindle library in folders. There's like a horror folder, a priority reads folder, a hard-boiled crime, western, science fiction, etc. There's also a folder called Katie for her books, nearly all of which are free contemporary romances self-published by up-and-coming romance authors. So Katie is not a huge profit center for Amazon, but she likes the books she reads. You following this so far?
You're good friends with Katie, and you both share the same account, and she likes rookie romance authors.
Yeah. I mean, she's also my sister, but yeah, we're
good.
All right, so I managed the Paperback Warrior Instagram account for us. You take care of Twitter, I do Instagram, we kind of share Facebook. And a few weeks ago, I get a direct message on Instagram from a guy named Andrew Schaefer. And he's a crime fiction author himself with some pretty big titles under his belt, but that's not part of the story. In the message, Andrew said to me, quote, I designed some pulp-style covers for my wife's new erotic romance series. I know that's not your usual genre, but I think you'd get a kick out of the vintage covers. I'd love to send you copies. Cheers! A very nice offer. So I respond, that's very nice of you. Unfortunately, we are a vintage fiction site focusing on paperbacks from the 20th century. That said, I'd love to see the cover art because I'm really interested in that sort of thing. Feel free to email them to me. I gave them my email address. However, I can't review the books on the podcast. I'm sorry about that. I'm sure the books are great, and I hope they sell well. Signed, Tom. So he sends me an email with the covers, and his wife is named Tiffany Rees. I will plug her. It's Reisz. And her books are The Last Good Night, Immersed in Pleasure, Little Red Riding Crop, Mischief, The Auction, The Mistress Files, and the covers that her husband designed are actually pretty cool. He explained that they were Harlequin romances that she wrote back in the day, and the publishing rights have reverted back to Tiffany. Now, she wanted an early Harlequin vibe back when they had pulp-style covers, so what Andrew did is he used stock photos and manipulated the hell out of them to create new covers broadly in the style of hard case crime, and the covers look cool to me. They also have a logo that he created that just says Pulp on them. So I went back and forth with him, telling him that I liked his covers, and eventually I sent him an email that said, Andrew, my sister reads stuff like this. If you can comp me with some ebooks of the best books in the collection, my sister will read and review them on Amazon, which is probably actually worth more than an endorsement from Paperback Warrior for an old romance. So then Andrew sends me 3 of the titles and warns me to warn my sister, Katie, that the books are absolutely filthy. And that his own mother won't even read them.
Jeez.
So I take the ebooks and I sideload them into my Kindle into the Katie folder. I then tell my sister that the deal I struck, and she agrees to read and review one on Amazon to help this nice guy out. So about a month passes. My sister is skiing in Colorado for spring break, and she sends me a text message that says, quote, I'm halfway through one of these books. It's good. It's a thriller. I was expecting porn or something. There's no sex at all. At least not yet, and it doesn't seem like it's on the way. And I respond, how odd. The author's husband warned me that the books are filthy. And Katie says, not at all. And I say, are you sure it's the same book? And Katie says, let me look. It's called Gulf Coast Girl. It was in my library, so I read it. I said, by Charles Williams? And she goes, yes. I go, that's one of my books from the 1950s. Charles Williams is very good. He's crime fiction royalty. And she goes, so I'm reading the wrong book? I go, well, it's a better book, I'm sure. So my sister somehow finds this Charles Williams book in our shared library and gets it mixed up with the Dirty Books by Tiffany Rees. Now, to Katie's credit, she really liked the Charles Williams book, and she finished it, and she later read one of Tiffany's books and enjoyed that as well, and said it was, in fact, filthy.
I can't think of a better way to expose a family member to crime noir than to tell them it's a sex-drenched romance paperback, so that's well played.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole thing is a win-win, but I just thought it was kind of a funny story of a mix-up and my sister unwittingly becoming a Charles Williams fan.
You think she'll read any more Charles Williams books?
I'll tell her to. I'll probably. Now that I have control of the Katie folder, I'm just going to begin loading it with all sorts of stuff and tell her it's porn novels, and she'll go right to it.
There you go. All right.
It's like chumming the waters.
Well, you mentioned you got some books, some acquisitions.
Yeah, let me run through these really quick. I'll start with the Stark House upcoming releases because they got a bunch of great stuff in the pipeline, and most of these aren't out now as of the day that this is broadcasting, but you can pre-order them from Amazon or at the Stark House website. First coming in May, we have a double of Westerns from the great Arnold Hano. I'm going to give you that one to review because you're more the Western guy. The books are called Slade and The Manhunter. Slade was originally published in 1956 from Lion Books under the name Ad Gordon. The Manhunter was a Signet book from 1957 published under the name Matthew Gant. The new Stark House reprint was an introduction by friend of the show, and host of the Six Gun Justice podcast, Paul Bishop. And it's called Arnold Hano, Master of the Western Noir. So I'm going to give that one to you, Eric, because it's, like I said, more in your wheelhouse than mine. Again, it's Slade and Manhunter by Arnold Hano. Now, the next double coming from Stark House in May is a couple sleaze novels from 1959 and 1960, originally published under the name Lauren Beauchamp. Now, astute listeners will know that Lauren Beauchamp was the pseudonym used by science fiction author Robert Silverberg at the beginning of his career. The books in question here, reprinted by Stark House, are Connie and Meg. I read Meg, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's about the super sexy Idaho girl with a giant rack, and her name is Meg. She leaves her small town to go to New York with the goal of breaking into showbiz. She falls in with a very sleazy but very effective theatrical agent who represents her, and the novel really follows her rise up the ranks of show business as she uses her sex appeal to get ahead, including strategically sleeping with the right people. There's lots of fun publicity stunts along the way. It wasn't a crime novel, and it really wasn't a porn novel at all, but it was really a cautionary tale about the cost of uninhibited ambition. I liked it a lot. Again, the book's called Meg by Robert Silverberg, writing as Lauren Beauchamp. It's published by Stark House as a double called Connie Meg, both by Silverberg, coming in May 2021. Looking forward to June. I want to jump ahead here for reasons I'll explain later. We have a Stark House double coming from our buddy Lionel White, consisting of 2 novels, Steal Big from 1960 and The Big Caper from 1955. Now, Lionel White, as we've talked about on the show before, is one of the masters of classic heist fiction. Listener, if you like the Parker books, the heist books under the name of Richard Stark, I think you're really going to like Lionel White. Now, Eric, one of these books that Stark House is reprinting is called The Big Caper. You read and reviewed it. What is it about?
Yeah, the book starred a World War II veteran named Frank, who finds himself befriended by this really crafty bank robber named Flood. And one thing leads to another, and Flood eventually proposes his boldest scheme to Frank. The idea is that a professional heist crew, featuring an arsonist, a safe breaker, 2 drivers, 2 gunmen, will rob a large bank in a small Florida town. But like any good old-fashioned bank blowout, there's a wrench in the gears that proves to be a fatal flaw. Flood's girlfriend, Kay. The Big Caper was an entertaining and pleasurable reading experience. I just can't say enough good things about Lionel White and his stellar body of work. I'd say he's probably in the very top echelon of the mid-20th century crime noir creators.
Everything I've read by him has been fantastic, and he was real prolific, too, and it seems like Stark House is committed to putting out darn near everything he wrote, so I'm just trying to catch up with them. They've been really vigilant about putting his books back into print. It's a fantastic imprint, and he's a fantastic author. Anyways, the new double coming in June, Steal Big and The Big Caper from Lionel White. Finally, also from Stark House, also coming in June, is another double volume of novels from Lawrence Heller. The first book is Crime Cop from 1959, originally published under the name Larry Holden, and the second is Body of the Crime from 1962, written as Larry Heller. The double volume has an introduction by Paul Bishop. He's been doing, I guess, some work for Stark House. And I've been singing Lawrence Heller's praises to anyone who will listen over the past year, so I'm excited to get into this double. Again, Crime Cop and Body of Crime by Lawrence Heller, coming in June from Stark House. Lastly, Eric, I want to tell you about this. I have a friend who is a critic and author from Utah named Ben Bolden. He's put together this really odd reference book called Killers, Crooks, and Spies, Jack Bickham's, Bickham's, fiction. It's a reference book filled with reviews, lists, and essays about 20th century paperback author Jack Bickham. Now, I was a huge Bickham fan back in the 1980s when I discovered the Wildcat O'Shea Western series he wrote under the pseudonym Jeff Clinton. He also wrote a series of mysteries under his own name taking place in the world of professional tennis. And thanks to Ben's book, I now know that he wrote lots of other cool stuff as well. Anyway, so if you like books about books, check out Killers, Crooks, and Spies, Jack Bickham's fiction by Ben Bolden. It's available as an ebook right now from Amazon. I think eventually it may find its way to paper. Oh, it's a lot of new acquisitions. Have you bought anything lately worth mentioning?
Well, I've been on this kick of collecting Gothic paperbacks, and I've bought a slew of them, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about Gothic paperbacks in a little while. I'm also exploring the 1950s and 1960s hot rod paperbacks.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I just bought one from William Campbell Galt called Drag Strip, which apparently was a pretty big seller back in the day. Have you read any hot rod fiction?
Not intentionally. I see a couple of them out there. There's one that's always jumping out at me at Chamblin's it's put up by that Lyle Kenyon Engel guy. I think you probably see those as well. I haven't pulled the trigger on them. I think back in probably the 1950s, owning a fast car was a real novelty. I mean, a car was basically new technology at that point. Now it's just so, you mean your car can get up to 70 miles an hour?
Right. I know. It's but I'm in my mid-40s, and I've been thinking about buying a used Camaro.
Okay, all right.
And so I was like, well, let me read some hot rod books just to kind of get into the field.
It might actually be a lot cheaper just to read the hot rod books as your midlife Chrysler.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about the podcast, Eric. I've been reflecting on how to attack this, and I don't really have a good plan.
Just tell the truth. Unfiltered candor is our brand, man. Go for it.
All right, so this is going to sound weird to listeners who don't know me personally or don't have like a relationship with me on Facebook. I have a job outside the podcast, and for the past 26 years, I've been an FBI special agent. And I know that sounds crazy given the subject matter of the books we cover, but Eric, verify for them that that is in fact true.
Yes, it is.
And if you're totally still disbelieving me or think this is some bit for the show, pause the show, go ahead and Google Tom Simon FBI if you need to verify this is true, because the story that I'm about to tell you makes no sense unless you actually believe me. I'm retiring, though, from my job that I've been doing for 26 years, and I'm retiring on May 31st. I've accepted a job doing some foreign police instruction overseas, and I'm also starting my own private investigative firm here in Florida, which I promise is going to be way less exciting in real life than the hard-boiled PI books we read and review. The upshot is that with the amount of time I'm going to be spending traveling and overseas, that there's really no way until I figure out exactly what my life's going to look like to do the kind of podcast I want to do with you, Eric, while I'm floating around the world. I do not want to do a podcast on Zoom, and where I'm going, the time change is going to be pretty severe anyway. So I need to take an indefinite break from the show. As far as background goes, and this is not easy to talk about for me because I do love this show. It's one of the things I love doing. But every 40-minute episode takes me 4 to 5 hours to research and write. And I feel like I'm also getting burned out. There's things I want to do in my retirement. I want to write a book of my own before I die. And you've got stuff going on with your job as well, right?
Well, yeah, but I was also going to say, this explains to all of our listeners why you travel around the country hitting all these bookstores and all these little towns. I'm sure they're probably like, what does he do for a living? Because you're always on the road, but now they know. So,
well, yeah, I mean, there's some sensitivity with the job, and so I wasn't really allowed to talk about it. It was also sort of a dicey thing whether, given my job as an FBI special agent, I'm even allowed to have a podcast, which is why I never hyped my name on the show. And part of the reason, my rationale why we don't do bylines, I really didn't want the FBI to know that I've been writing and publishing, because I signed an agreement back in 1995 when I began the job to not write or publish anything without it going through pre-publication review with the FBI. The gloves are off now. The FBI is not going to take my pension away because I have a podcast talking about old books. I'm not worried about that.
Makes
so
sense.
I can come out of the closet now as an FBI special agent. But listen, I love the FBI. I don't have a bad word to say about the agency. It's been a fantastic career. I'm just going on to the next step. But there's some stuff going on with your job too, right? Because when I shared this with you in total candor off the air, you mentioned that you're feeling some stress, time stress about your job as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, not taking anything away from you, but yeah, it's been the perfect storm that's been created with this, because my job has changed dramatically this year. In the past few years, my career has been pretty simple and left a lot of time during the day just reading and working on the podcast and blog. I mean, I really had it made. But now, due to all the additional roles that I've assumed with work, man, I'm just lucky to get through the emails after 8 hours of grind, and it's just overwhelming. And I'm even questioning now what I want to do with my life, because this job has really taken a lot out of me mentally. But with that comes time and quality of life, and I spend a lot of time away from my family doing the podcast. It's about a half hour over here to your house, and we spend an entire evening working on episodes and editing, and then before work the next day, I'm making artwork, and Tom's doing some last-minute edits for social media and our podcast hosting, so it's just a lot of work.
It should be said that Eric is still relatively a newlywed. He remarried recently with kind of an instant family, with a new wife and a new daughter, and so it's probably not totally fair for you to neglect them the amount that you have been in furtherance of making this podcast work, right?
Exactly, yeah. I've got a stepdaughter, and then, of course, my daughter I only see on the weekends, so I don't see her a whole lot, and the last thing I want to do on the weekends is do edits for the podcast, and as much as I enjoy it, there's other things I'd rather do.
Yes, we got to figure out what to do. I mean, I want to keep reading old paperback fiction. I've done that my whole life, and writing reviews of the books I read for Paperback Warrior is pretty easy. That doesn't take up extra time for me. I know it takes up time for you to get everything posted because you run the actual website, but I can do that. But I have to tell you, honestly, there's other stuff I'd like to read as well, mostly contemporary horror. I'd like to read some graphic novels, stuff that doesn't necessarily fit into the Paperback Warrior wheelhouse, unless you think it makes sense to really expand the content we cover, which is probably, I wouldn't advise you of it, but it's your website. So I need to reduce my output for the blog for the time being, or at least lower everyone's expectations about what I can produce as far as the number of reviews per year. Now, you've always produced enough content for the blog without me, but you've got some decisions to make. And, if you want to take on a third writer, I won't be offended. Or when stuff gets busy for you and I at the same time, maybe there's just fewer new episodes, reviews rather, each week on the blog. So, ultimately that's your call.
Yeah, I'm going to continue with the blog for sure, and I'll be posting reviews as well as any that I receive from you. The schedule right now, I was looking, is it's got just about a new review every single day all the way through the month of May. By June is when the blog may reduce down to just 2 or 3 reviews each week, which is still probably as good or as good as anyone else out there that's running our kind of blogs. But I don't see a situation where we can read and write any more reviews than that on a weekly basis.
Right. I want to stress to you, Eric, and to the listener that I am not quitting Paperback Warrior as a brand. And if you want to get together every now and then to record a random episode, I'd like that. If you want to go solo with the show and have me record a review or two on my iPhone from afar, I can certainly do that as well. I just don't have the bandwidth right now with everything that's going on to produce an episode every week without having a gosh darn nervous breakdown
Right.
with everything else I got going on. Does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah, it's totally understandable, and I feel the same way. This will be a load off of my stress level. Now, when I leave your library today, I'm going to take the recording equipment back to my house, and I'm going to say, right now that I may do some shows as a solo venture, at least for a little while. It won't be every week. It's not going to be every Monday. It may not even be one per month, but it's really easy for me to record in my library during the day because I work in there all day, and it's not a huge burden to just turn the mic on and tell you guys what's happening with releases and books I bought and some reviews and a few other odds and ends. It won't be like what we do, but it's something that I can still continue doing. And like you mentioned, you aren't going to live overseas forever. You're going to be in town and can pop in and record a show or two with me. And all of these will be announced on our blog and the social media sites as well in terms of new content. In terms of our archived content, with the donations we received and the money out of our own pockets, we're going to be leaving the podcast episodes where you found them. The streaming services, the blog, YouTube, etc. will remain unfazed. And like I said earlier, or last week, it's over 55 hours of content, and I can probably say that that's more than what anyone else has ever done for the vintage paperbacks that we read and cover here. Which also reminds me to thank some of our most recent superfans. Do you mind if I do that?
Yeah, no, knock that out. They deserve to be thanked.
All right, so Bob Dice, Peter Robel, Joseph Vega, David Kowalski, and David Auriglio. And also I want to say, if any donors feel cheated by our announcement and the path of the future, please let us know, and we'll happily return the money. We totally get it if you feel that way.
Yeah, and I'm also up for revisiting this issue down the road when both of us figure out how we're going to make money to support our families and our real lives. And we each fall into kind of a routine. But during this time of transition for both of us, this added stress of putting together a weekly show is just something that's got to give. But for now, okay, so the Paperback Warrior podcast, as far as I'm concerned, is not over. And when you're recording solo shows, if you want to hit me up and have me do a review in my iPhone, I can hit you up. The sound quality is going to suck, but our people don't seem to care about that much.
Right.
So
yeah, why not?
All right.
So yeah, it's easy. And yeah, but anyway, congratulations on the retirement, man. I don't think I've even said that. So,
I mean, it's melancholy, right? I've had the same job for 26 years without a promotion, and,
Right.
and so the idea of doing anything else, I'm terrified that I'm maybe not even qualified to do that. So,
Yep.
Anyway, upshot is that this will be our last episode until it's not. Anything else we need to talk about this?
I think that's it.
Okay, cool. Let's do a feature. So our feature today is about a guy named Frank E. Smith who wrote crime novels under the name Jonathan Craig. As I said earlier, we did a feature on his work under the Jonathan Craig name back on episode 3, very beginning. Probably sounded like garbage. But since then, we've learned some things about him that bear further discussion. So we want to revisit him this week as our feature. Now, it's a very brief bio. Frank E. Smith lived from 1919 to 1984. According to the Killer Covers of the Week blog, he was born in Santa Monica, California, and raised in Kansas City, Missouri during the Great Depression. After working as a newspaperman, he moved to Washington, D.C. to work for the federal government. During World War II, he joined the Navy, and while he was still in his 20s, he became a top analyst at the Pentagon, providing briefings to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He continued to serve President Harry Truman through 1945 as an advisor regarding the rebuilding of Europe. He left the government in 1952 to become a full-time writer under the name Jonathan Craig during the advent of paperback original novels and Manhunt magazine, where he contributed a lot of stories. His most famous series as Jonathan Craig is the Pete Selby Stan Raider series of police procedural paperbacks for Fawcett Gold Medal that were later reprinted for Belmont Tower as the 6th Precinct series. So that's what everybody already knows about Jonathan Craig. But what many people don't know is that Frank E. Smith continued writing after retiring the Jonathan Craig name. Now, Eric, why don't you take it from here?
Listeners, you know those paperbacks that feature a woman in a nightgown or a flowing dress running in the dark from this imposing mansion with a single light burning upstairs? The girl's almost always looking over her shoulder.
I see those books all the time, and you and I have talked about this. You and I have traveled around Florida, and I've seen you buying these books. I'm always unclear if they're horror novels or romances or mysteries or just something completely different. I'm constantly tempted to pick one up just to find out what the hell she's running from in that mansion. The curiosity is killing me.
Well, it's a genre unto itself, and it's simply called Gothics. And from the mid-1960s through the 1970s, these were paperback gold and had worldwide appeal. I think most of it was the really, really cool artwork described by you earlier with the woman running from the mansion or the castle. Typically, there's a suggestion of two things on the cover: some sort of romance and some inkling of the supernatural or a mysterious murder. When we use the term Gothic, it isn't like Edgar Allan Poe or some old Hammer horror vampire flick, but these Gothic paperbacks sort of skirt the edge, and they incorporate a lot of the same Victorian imagery. What I've noticed is location seems to be key with these stories, and most of them take place on rocky shorelines shrouded in sea fog, or big mountain estates, or southern plantations, European castles, or just your plain old big house in the woods. Now, the New American Gothic, which is what these books are sometimes categorized under, is described by a popular literary critic named Irving Mallon as the Gothic house functioning as an image of authoritarianism.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Easy for you to say.
I know, right? As an image of authoritarianism. It's hard to say.
Authoritarianism.
I'm going to leave all that in. I'm not even going to edit it out.
Yeah, why not?
It's our last episode for a while. Imprisonment or confining narcissism, a growing obsession with one's own problems, a turning inward instead of growing outward. The physical surroundings often mimic the inward turning of the characters. So the bad place becomes about interest of fear of the self. Instead of a symbolic womb, it's a symbolic mirror. So the woman in these books are always insecure. They're the vulnerable guest that's learning as much about themselves as the murder mystery. In some cases, there's some sort of ancient secret that's affecting her through marriage or her own family roots. Often these women are teachers who accept positions in mansions to tutor children. While the supernatural is always mentioned, it seems to be rarely utilized as just a full-on horror concept. These aren't like The Shining, for example, or The Haunting of Hill House. It's less horror, more romance, and more Gothic imagery. And, it really erases any kind of modern sensibilities whatsoever. Perhaps the evolution of these Gothic paperbacks could have stemmed from a daytime soap opera that you may have heard of called Dark Shadows.
I remember that. It was always shown on reruns when I was a kid. I never watched it. Was it any good?
I couldn't watch it either. I didn't watch it. I couldn't watch it. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel for a long time.
Yeah.
But this was a throwback to the old vampire movies, but set in a romantic soap opera kind of way. The idea is that an estate owned by the Collins family in Maine is home to a vampire clan led by Barnabas Collins. And the show ran for 6 full seasons and was rebooted in the 1990s by NBC with only 1 season. Now, I did watch that, and I really enjoyed it.
I think they did a bunch of tie-in paperbacks for it. Every now and then I see
they did.
the paperbacks.
Yeah, it was. It's also a comedy film starring Johnny Depp. I think Tim Burton did it.
Oh, that's right. They made it kind of campy.
Yeah, it was really dumb.
I can't stand Tim Burton. So.
But the soap opera was loved by many, and I would imagine a situation where housewives fell in love with the idea of these sleepy, foggy oceanside mansions holding all these dark and deadly secrets and beautiful people. So purchasing the same sort of novels on bookshelves at the grocery store probably wasn't a tough decision for them to make. They could just quickly become lost in this fantasy.
Sounds like the atmospherics are very important in this genre. It's like the setting becomes a character unto itself. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that's the key is the locale, really. Yeah. But needless to say, because these things were so successful, a lot of crime noir, horror, and fiction authors flocked to the genre because it was such a retail success. And then here's just a few notable names that authored Gothics at that time. Michael Avalone. Oh, yeah, we always get it corrected.
We got corrected,
yeah. Michael Avalone wrote them as Jean-Anne Desprez, Priscilla Dalton, Dorothea Nile, and also Edwina Noon.
Now, do you understand why Edwina Noon's funny?
I was going to ask you about that.
Okay, so Avalone's big series, like his version of Shel Scott or Mike Hammer, is the Ed Noon series of hard-boiled mysteries. They're really excellent, actually. I love the Ed Noon books. And so the idea that when it was time for him to write a Gothic, that he used the pseudonym Edwina Noon is right now it's funny. Back then, probably nobody caught it, but it's very clever. It'd be like if Mickey Spillane wrote Gothics under the name like Michelle Hammer or something.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hey, have you ever heard of a guy named Dean R. Koontz? You ever heard of that guy?
I'm very familiar with him.
Yeah. So he was Deanna Dwyer writing these things.
He wrote Gothic romance books.
Yeah, I think he's got 5 or 6 of them.
I'll be darned.
And then a lot of them got rewritten, re-edited into horror books later in the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s.
Yeah.
A horror author named Charles L. Grant. He was a pretty popular guy. He was Deborah Lewis. There's a guy named Morris Hirschman. He was a popular author, and he was Evelyn Bond, and had a ton of Gothics under that name. But a guy we talked about a few weeks back, Norman Daniels, his wife Dorothy Daniels, they both had success writing Gothic novels, either separately or together. We'll never know, but they all had a hand in it as well. But in fact, our feature today on Frank E. Smith includes a lot of Gothics, Tom. In fact, Frank E. Smith was an author named Jennifer Hale, and wrote 5 Gothic novels: Portrait of Evil, Beyond the Dark, House of Strangers, which, oddly, Lancer incorrectly listed the author on the copyright page as Ware Tory Budlong, which is also Lee Crosby. But we think that was, in fact, Frank Smith.
Right.
And Secret of Devil's Cave and Raven's Ridge.
I have Raven's Ridge.
Yeah, you should read it.
Yeah, I probably will.
Yeah.
I mean, you read one of them, right? Did you? Which one did you read?
Yeah, I read. I read The Secret of Devil's Cave.
How was that?
It was good. It was about this young woman named Beth, and she's grieving from the death of her father. And when they read the will at the attorney's office, she's like shocked to discover that her father owns this large inn and a large portion of land in the Ozarks, of all things. And as the title suggests, there's also a mammoth cave there, which is the Devil's Cave. And the whole thing has been this tourist destination for years, and her father never took her there, and he never mentioned it. It's really odd. But Beth, curiosity kind of killed the cat. Beth travels to the inn to check out her inheritance, and it's there that she finds this really, really odd family that lives there and runs the whole thing. And they've been lying to the town all along, claiming they were the sole owners. And the caves themselves, they've got like a spooky backstory of murder, and they're supposedly haunted by a ghost. In town, Beth sees a painting that bears a striking resemblance to herself, even though she's never been there. And there's a so-called witch in town that says that Beth has actually already died in town, and that's why she can hear the ghostly voices from the cave.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool. But overall, this was a really fun read, and Smith is just a really good storyteller. And I've already bought another of his Jennifer Hale novels, and it's set in spooky Florida.
Oh, now you're talking.
Of all things.
Swamp Gothic.
Yeah, it's actually, what's cool about that one is it's set in an abandoned hotel.
That's fun. I love any book that takes place in a hotel or a motel. Yeah. It's sold for me. It's easy.
I'm going to read it.
Okay, cool. So to give the title and pseudonym one more time.
So this is Frank E. Smith writing as Jennifer Hale, and the name of this one was The Secret of Devil's Cave.
All right, cool. So while Eric was discovering Frank E. Smith's foray into the world of Gothic fiction, I stumbled upon a book that I think maybe a lost paperback of Frank E. Smith written before he died. Eric, I want to hand this to you. Take this for real. Here, take it. And tell the readers what that appears to be.
It looks like a creepy carnival horror novel, but with a really bland cover.
Title?
This is called Hot Summer Night, and the author is Elston Barrett.
Right. What do you think of the cover? The cover art.
Like I said, it's kind of creepy, but it's sort of bland too. It's just a clown, like a little clown doll, holding a match that's lit.
I'll go further. There's nothing about this 1980 paperback that is appealing at first glance. I find that photo cover in your hand to be embarrassingly bad. A mystifying font choice makes the title Hot Summer Night almost unreadable.
It is, yeah, it's almost transparent.
And the author, Elston Barrett, isn't a name that anyone knows. And looking at this, is this a horror novel? Is it a carnival thriller? Why anyone would buy this low-budget book and read it is beyond me. However, I searched rather hard to find a copy of this paperback, and I did this because I have a theory that this novel, Hot Summer Night by Elston Barrett, is actually a lost work by Frank E. Smith that has never been listed in any bibliography of his work anywhere on planet Earth. Let's start with the basics. Whether this book is by Frank E. Smith or not, I believe that Elston Barrett is most likely a pseudonym. I could find no record of any other novels ever published under the name Elston Barrett. And unfortunately, Leisure Books never bothered to register this book with the U.S. Copyright Office, so that's no help either. In the 1950s, however, this is my case. Frank E. Smith's literary agent was a guy named Scott Meredith, whose clients were the top crime fiction guys at the time. Richard Deming, Donald Westlake. I think Lawrence Block worked for Scott Meredith. Meredith's stable of authors also served as the farm team who wrote hard-boiled crime stories for Manhunt magazine, where Smith, as Jonathan Craig, contributed a ton of stories. Now, the success of Manhunt magazine spawned a bunch of other hard-boiled crime digest imitators, including two magazines, one called Hunted and the other called Pursuit. Follow this. During the years 1954 to 1956, Frank E. Smith sold 6 stories to Hunted and Pursuit that were published under the name Elston Barrett. Now, these would have been logical stories for the Jonathan Craig pen name, but I'm told that at least one of these magazines already had a Jonathan Craig story in them, and the digest never wanted to have 2 stories by the same name in the same issue on the table of contents. So, Eric, during the 1970s, Smith was living in Florida and authoring the Gothic romance novels under the Jennifer Hale name until his death in 1984. So if I'm right, and Smith is the real author of this 1980 book, Hot Summer Night, it would have actually been his last published novel. So you may or may not be convinced that Hot Summer Night is Frank Smith, but here's some more data points. The publisher of Hot Summer Night is Leisure Books, founded in 1957 by a guy named Harry Shorten, who retired in 1982. Now, Shorten also oversaw a sleaze paperback publishing house called Midwood Books that drew upon writers represented by Scott Meredith to write erotic novels in the 1950s and 1960s. So it stands to reason that Frank E. Smith and Shorten would have known each other for decades before Shorten bought and published Smith's final book, Hot Summer Night, in 1980. There are other things inside the book Hot Summer Night where Smith left his fingerprints behind. First, the book takes place in 1932 in Missouri, which is not a typical year for a 1980 thriller to take place. It was, however, a year that Smith would have remembered vividly from his own boyhood in Missouri, where his family relocated during the Great Depression. It stands to reason that Smith was drawing from his own memories of struggling carnivals limping through Missouri at the time. I think the Missouri 1932 setting of this weird book, published in 1980, strongly implicates Smith as the author. I'm going to double down on my prediction here and say that I think Hot Summer Night was likely what they call a trunk novel that Frank E. Smith probably wrote but didn't sell many years before its 1980 publication. He probably blew the dust off some old manuscript, did some re-editing, and sold it for a couple grand to his old friend at Leisure Books while both of these guys were at the end of their careers. And the low-end paperback house slapped this crummy cover on the novel, sold a couple thousand copies, and the world forgot this paperback ever existed. Like I said, the book does not even exist in any bibliography of Smith's body of work. So that's my theory. I could be wrong, but it makes sense to me.
What's the book about?
All right, so the book takes place in 1932, and it's about a carnival, a traveling carnival called the Great Stratton Shows, and the carnival's fallen on hard times. The general manager is Brady Stratton, and he's fighting to keep his family business afloat. There's competitive pressures, the economic downturn, the Great Depression. The only hope of solvency is winning the contract to provide the attractions for the Cullis County Fair, and Brady only has 10 days to raise the $10,000 for a participation fee. So the book has a lot of plot threads, all of which are compelling. Let me give you a couple. One, there's a black mechanic for the carnival who's run off the road by rednecks because he had a white female carny in the front seat with him. There's a fist fight, leaves one of the townies injured, and the rowdies are looking for revenge. That's a subplot. Cindy Stratton, the little sister of the family, has a daredevil act where she dives 60 feet down into 4 feet of water. And she's facing the distraction of a rich boyfriend from Kansas City. There's another little brother named Tommy Stratton who rides loops on the motorcycle in the globe of death. Now, he's jeopardizing the carnival's operation by making time with a jailbait girl. There's a maniac on the loose planting incendiary devices at the carnival hoochie coochie tents. Now, this maniac arsonist is driven by religious outrage because he believes that the girly shows represent a modern-day Sodom that needs to be destroyed. Can the arsonist be stopped before he turns the canvas tents into hell on earth? That type of thing. There's an ex-con one step ahead of the law who sees the carnival as a perfect mark for a payroll heist. All he needs is an insider to make it happen. There's another subplot about a deformed teenage girl who's dropped off at the carnival by her family in hopes of finding a spot in the freak show exhibit. Could this be the girl's only hope at finding a real family who will love her for herself? So my point is, there's a 240-page, very big font paperback, and there is a lot going on. Now, to the author's credit, the many, many story threads are all interesting, and they're all resolved quite nicely by the end. But I have to say, at the time, it felt like a special 2-hour episode of The Love Boat, where there's all these different plot threads, and they're kind of crossing with each other. Contrary to the dreadful cover art, Hot Summer Night isn't a horror novel at all. Now, some of the subplots are very suspenseful, but I found it to be just a very mainstream novel with a fascinating setting. I love carnival books. I think the whole carny lifestyle is really interesting. The author, whether it was Frankie Smith or not, clearly took a long time to learn about carnival culture and slang. And so he introduces a character of a female newspaper reporter doing a feature on the carnival. And she serves as like a proxy for the reader who's getting up to speed on carny terms like mitcamp and madball, grab stand, 10-in-1, all that stuff. So anyone who's into carny culture is really going to like this book. Is it a literary masterpiece? No, but it was an enjoyable look at a subculture that most of us are never going to get to see from the inside. So whether or not it was written by Frankie Smith or not, it's an easy recommendation if you could find a copy cheaply. Before I end this, I want to thank two subject matter experts I turned to for this feature. One is J. Kingston Pierce, who writes a blog called The Rap Sheet at therapsheet.blogspot.com that covers mystery and crime fiction, both new and old. He's very knowledgeable regarding the work of Frankie Smith writing as Jonathan Craig. But there's another blogger I really admire named J.F. Norris, who writes at prettysinister.blogspot.com. Now, he's written a lot about Jonathan Craig over the years, so I reached out for him with my theory about Elston Barrett, and I think that he thought that I was a weirdo because I don't even really know the guy, but he heard me out. He did his own research and hit the same cul-de-sacs I did regarding authorship and proving it whether Hot Summer Night was really Frankie Smith or not. Now, Mr. Norris pointed out that the content of Hot Summer Night with its cast of outcasts and misfits is very consistent with themes that Smith explored in his own work. He recommended that I do syntax comparisons, but the problem here is that most of the books I've read by Jonathan Craig were written in the first person, and Hot Summer Night is a third-person novel. It was also 30 years older than most of his Jonathan Craig books that I read. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Norris, for hearing me out. His blog is awesome. Everyone should check that out. So that's my feature on Frankie Smith. You got something on that?
Yeah, so on my Jennifer Hill research, I talked a lot with Greg Shepard at Starkhouse, and also what's become my pen pal lately, Graham down in Australia.
Oh, he's a good dude. Yeah. Graham's a real super fan.
Very informative.
All right, so give us a review. You got a review to do.
Yeah, so I'm going to do Bill Pronzini's book, Panic.
I believe that's Panic with an exclamation point at the end.
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm. Bill Pronzini is mostly known for his Nameless detective series that's ran 50 installments or something. He also has his hands in lots of compilations and editing, but Pronzini also authored a lot of standalone titles like this one. Again, it's called Panic with an exclamation mark, and it was originally published in 1972.
Was it exclamation point or a question mark or exclamation point?
Exclamation point.
You said question mark.
We're running out here. But it was originally published in 1972, and then since then it's been reprinted several times. In the book's opening pages, readers are introduced to a drifter named Lennox, and he has a whole backstory that I'm not going to get into here, but let's just say he's running from something and has become stranded in this really small desert town. He's out of money and he's out of food, so a cafe owner allows Lennox to sleep on a cot in the back and work for meals. So pretty much bottom of the barrel for our guy Lennox. There's another character as well, and her name is Jaina, and she's running from something as well. She's an author and an illustrator, and she comes to this little desert town to escape her literary agent and all of his pesky deadlines. And it's here that Jaina hopes to study the rock formations so that she can illustrate them for the new book that she's promised her publisher and agent that she's going to write. Now, while Lennox is working in the cafe's basement, and Jaina is way out in the desert looking at rocks, two hitmen show up at the empty cafe and place a dozen bullets in the cafe owner. Now, Lennox hears all of it from the basement, and he peeks out to see that the two men are walking outside, possibly coming back in to clean up. So he's afraid that they're going to see his cot and realize that another person's there. So Lennox does what I would do, and he runs out the back door and makes a sprint into the desert to escape these two hitmen. These two hitmen see him running, and they make a beeline to the car to run him down. Eventually, they can't go any further on foot, and they grab weapons for the foot chase. As you can probably guess, Lennox eventually runs into Jaina and drags her into the chase. So Panic is basically two characters on the run from two bad guys in a scorching desert with no food, weapons, or supplies. Now, one of the best parts of the book is a fifth character, and he's a drunken, washed-up cop named Bracken, who's the one guy who can piece the whole murder together and realize what's happening. His transition from sort of like the town embarrassment in a way to hero is a great reading experience, and it really shows off Pronzini's talents as a storyteller. This is just a great book, and it's short, and it's fast-paced, and it was just so riveting. I loved it, and I think you will too. Again, this is Panic with an exclamation point by Bill Pronzini.
I like Bill Pronzini. I read a book, Snowbound, by him that I really loved, and he's great. And he's also a real academic about the old paperbacks as well. My review is about the Nolan series, the first installment by Max Allan Collins. The series lasted for 9 books, stretching between 1973 and 2021, with some sizable gaps in there where there was nothing happening. The books are kind of a pastiche or a tribute to the Parker series by Donald E. Westlake, writing as Richard Stark, but they were written with Westlake's blessing, so it wasn't like Collins was ripping anybody off. Hard Case Crime has reprinted the first 2 installments in one volume called Two for the Money, but my review today is really just starting with the opener Bait Money from 1973. As we meet Nolan, he's a 48-year-old professional heist man recovering from a bullet wound with a dame while feeling very sorry for himself. See, 16 years ago, Nolan made enemies with a mid-level Chicago mobster named Charlie, and Nolan's been dodging and catching bullets from that guy ever since. Now, through an intermediary, Nolan attempts to broker a truce with Charlie so Nolan can finally retire from the heist business in peace and run a nightclub without looking over his shoulder. Now, finding peace with Charlie comes with a price tag of $100,000. And the only way Nolan can get that kind of cash is to pull one more job. So Nolan teams up with 3 amateurs, which I have to say is always a mistake in heist fiction,
Right.
to knock over a bank in Davenport, Iowa. Now, Collins populates this paperback with an outstanding supporting cast of underworld characters and bumbling wannabes. The heist planning section was really rewarding, and the robbery and the aftermath both contained some grade A action set pieces. Overall, I found Nolan to be a little more of a vulnerable character than Parker from the Richard Stark books. But the differences, I think, worked really well. The story structure was similar, and I can't imagine anyone liking one series and not liking the other. I'm told that Bait Money flows really nicely into the second book, Blood Money, so I'm excited to dive back in for more Nolan action because I can't get enough of Max Allan Collins writing. He's so good. I should also mention that there's a brand new Nolan novel that just came out. We've talked about it on the show before. It's called Skim Deep, that just came out this year in 2021, and the reviews for it have been stellar. Max Allan Collins is annoyed at me for not reading and reviewing it because I want to read the series in order, but I will plug it. He can be as annoyed as he wants, but he's a great writer. He's one of my favorites and all that. Anyway, Eric, I think that wraps up this installment and this kind of chapter in the life of the Paperback Warrior podcast. I personally, I'll have to tell you, it's been an honor doing the show with you. And I look forward to collaborating on new projects in the future, whatever they are. And to the listener, I want to thank you always for hearing us out. So, Eric, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, likewise. It's been a lot of fun with you as well, and I'm sure we'll be doing something like this again.
For sure.
This concluded the 88th episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. To keep up with our continuing adventures, follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and join us at paperbackwarrior.com for new reviews of all these old books. Stay tuned to your podcast subscriptions because I may show up as a solo artist at some point in the near future. On behalf of Tom, this is Eric saying so long.
Be cool.